The date is April 6th, 2014. Lexi Thompson has just shot a bogey-free final round to win her first major title. Viktor Orban's Fidesz has just been re-elected Prime Minister of Hungary, and Regular Show is going on its fourth season. But for 920,000 people around the world, there is only one thing that matters. And it's the fact that Daniel Bryan is currently in a match for the WWE Championship at Wrestlemania 30. Now, if you're a fan of football, then this number probably won't seem that impressive to you, considering that the average Super Bowl gets around 45 million viewers. But if you've ever been to a professional wrestling match, then you know that what the audience lacks in numbers, it makes up for with energy. The thing that makes wrestling so special when compared to other sports is that no matter how small the audience, the crowd always makes you feel like you're part of a community when you watch it. Even if you don't know the particular backstory of a wrestler or a match, you can still have a great time just from getting swept up by the crowd and their reaction to the match. And this is due to the fact that professional wrestling is, and always has been, scripted. Hence the term sports entertainment that WWE likes to go by. Given that wrestling is fake, or at least as fake as you can get when being hit in the head with a steel chair, and that their only goal is to keep the audience entertained and hooked for the next episode of Raw or SmackDown, they can easily play off the audience's excitement in order to build matches up and storylines around what the people want to see. However, management can also use this against the crowd by giving the opposite of what they want to see in order to shock them. Whichever one is chosen, the result is the same. The audience themselves ends up feeling like they are involved in the match, and as a result, they have more fun watching the storylines unfold in front of them. So, what exactly does any of this have to do with WrestleMania 30? What's so special about WrestleMania in the first place? Well, in order to talk about that, we're first gonna have to go back, roughly 34 years back, to what is arguably the most important match in wrestling history. The history of professional wrestling is a long and complicated one that spans many different companies featuring many different wrestlers. But without question, the biggest and most influential of these companies was Vince McMahon's WWF. In a time where wrestling was split up into 30 or so struggling companies scattered across the US that only appealed to a very few select people, Vince had dreams of appealing to a wider audience. A much wider audience. Whereas other wrestling promotions tried to balance the scripted, soap opera-esque nature of wrestling with legitimate athletic competition, Vince decided to double down on the scripted side of wrestling and market it under the brand of sports entertainment as opposed to professional wrestling, making it now official to the public that it was all for show. The first big showcase of this new formula being at, you guessed it, WrestleMania. With names like Hulk Hogan and Mr. T under Vince's belt, WrestleMania became established as the WWF's premier show and quickly became regarded as the Super Bowl of wrestling, being so successful that it spawned other pay-per-view events such as Survivor Series and the Royal Rumble just to build up matches for other future WrestleManias, eventually resulting in what many consider, me included, to be the most important match in wrestling history. Even though it was never publicly said, and the wrestlers made sure to make their matches look as real as possible, it was well established and accepted by this point that wrestling was fake, and was prioritizing storytelling over actual wrestling. But it wasn't until this match that the benefits of storytelling were put on display in such a grand fashion. In one of the most awe-inspiring matches in wrestling history, Andre the Giant, a man who had not lost a match in 15 years, went up against the most popular wrestler and WWF champion at the time, Hulk Hogan. Given that wrestling had somewhat stayed in the realm of realism for so long, and given Andre's winning streak and overall appearance, most people watching this event would have assumed that Andre would win. But not only did they subvert the audience's expectations, but they did so with style. This match was, quite literally, the dawning of a new era for wrestling. Never before had a match with such a huge storyline, spectacle, and performance ever been attempted. And as the WWF continued to grow, expanding to a weekly episodic show twice a week, and having multiple pay-per-views per year, Wrestlemania retained its status as the grandest stage in all of professional wrestling, where only the best of the best get to compete. Which only begs the question, how far will a wrestler go to compete on the grandest stage of them all? One of the things that makes WrestleMania 30 so special is its overall structure and how it gets the viewer hooked in with its very first match. That match, of course, being Daniel Bryan versus Triple H. Daniel Bryan came from humble beginnings in the WWE, starting out as a rookie wrestler on WWE's newest show, NXT, and then being featured as a mid-card wrestler for nearly 3 years straight. He did find some success in his early years, eventually becoming the World Heavyweight Champion and forming a successful tag team with Kane. But for the most part, he was played for a joke, and it was very clear that the corporate team behind WWE thought of Bryan as only a comedic character and did not want him as the WWE Champion. So, when he finally did get his chance to compete for it, and actually managed to pin the WWE Champion, this happened. In recent years, WWE has garnered a bad reputation for wasting talented wrestlers, and to be fair, yeah, it's kinda true. But Daniel Bryan was different. To the dismay of the Authority, the audience just would not shut up about Daniel Bryan.
A game-changing moment in time.
Endlessly chanting his name at every opportunity and making it clear that they would not let the Authority bury him. The WWE Universe had grown to love Daniel Bryan. He might not have looked the part of a traditional WWE champion, but he was great on the microphone, was, and still is one of the most technically gifted wrestlers in WWE. And more than anything else, he appealed to the everyman in all of us. Daniel wasn't some ripped ex-UFC fighter or former 10-time world champion. Hell, he didn't even come from a wrestling family like 80% of all of the other wrestlers on the roster. He was just some guy, trying to fight his way to the top of the ladder. He was just a guy trying to be the best at what he did. Everyone out there can relate to the story of a man being told he's not good enough to achieve his dreams, and it sold every single fan on Daniel Bryan, which over the course of the next 8 months led to one of the most electrifying movements in WWE history. When Daniel Bryan was told no, he would never be the face of WWE by the COO Triple H and the rest of the Authority, he fought back and united the entire WWE universe with one simple word. Week after week, for nearly 8 months, Daniel Bryan tormented Triple H, filling the air of the stadiums with yes chants and picking fights with him whenever possible, which Triple H took well. Typically when it comes to feuds in the WWE, you have, at a minimum, 1/4 of the audience siding for the person that no one else is. But when it came to the yes movement, it genuinely felt like every single person in the stadiums and watching from home was involved in the yes movement and on the side of the biggest underdog in all of professional wrestling. Daniel Bryan used the audience's involvement to his advantage, always hyping up the crowds, telling them that they were the reason he had gotten better at wrestling over the years, and how the Authority didn't want them to win. The result of this ended up being that every viewer who watched Daniel struggle felt the pain right alongside him. Every punch and kick thrown Daniel's way hurt the audience just as much as it did himself. For 8 months, the audience felt Bryan's pain and watched him struggle to fight back against the authority. Until finally, on March 10th, Daniel Bryan made his last stand, where he and 200 of his loyal fans held the show hostage by occupying the ring and claiming that they would only leave if Triple H agreed to give Bryan a match against him at WrestleMania 30, which Triple H was more than happy to grant. But there was one more thing that Daniel wanted. If he was able to beat Triple H, he wanted a spot in the main event against the current WWE champion Randy Orton that same night. Once again, Triple H took this well. And just like that, after months of abuse from his employers, Bryan had finally been given the chance to fight back. And fight back he did. The first match at WrestleMania was between Daniel Bryan and Triple H, and by no means was it one-sided. The match had plenty of ups and downs for both men, with Triple H targeting Daniel's already injured shoulder in an attempt to cripple him, and with Bryan being thrown around like the ragdoll for most of the match, it looked like Bryan's defeat was inevitable. But by feeding off the energy of the crowd, Bryan was able to make a comeback, and at the last moment, able to get the win. And with that victory, Daniel Bryan had just secured himself a slot in the main event on the grandest stage of them all for the chance to become the face of the company. And as always, Triple H took this well. By having this be the first match of the night, it guaranteed that every viewer at home would be glued to their screen for the rest of the show, and wonder if he was really going to be able to pull off a win against 2 other wrestlers after having already fought earlier that night. So, would Daniel Bryan really become the face of the company? Well, much like the audience at WrestleMania 30, you'll have to wait until the end to find that out, because WrestleMania is home to multiple matches. And next up on WrestleMania 30's lineup is quite possibly one of the most cerebral storylines in WWE history. Even if you don't watch WWE, there's a solid chance that you've at least heard of John Cena. And what's there really to say? He's a 16-time WWE champion with more than 10 years straight as the face of the company under his belt. Honestly, I'd be shocked if you didn't know who he was. However, those of you who don't watch wrestling would probably be surprised to hear that despite John Cena sounding like a beloved idol in the wrestling world, he's actually one of the most booed and hated wrestlers of all time. From California to his own hometown of Boston, Massachusetts, it seems like John Cena can never escape the dreaded "Cena sucks" chants. And for what reason does the WWE Universe hate him so much? Well, it's complicated. Reasons have ranged from people not being impressed with his overall in-ring talent, to the fact that he appears to have a hard time putting over other wrestlers. But every other reason pales in comparison to the simple fact that John Cena is boring. Or at least, on paper he is. The main reason why John Cena receives so much hate, in my opinion, is because he's way too simple. In John Cena's 15-year run as the face of the WWE, he never turned heel. Not even once. From the time he won his first championship until his departure in late 2019, he remained a bland, stereotypical goody two-shoes who stood for hustle, loyalty, and respect, showed respect to his opponents, gave his opponents fair matches when he could have easily taken advantage and won, and was the corporate face of the company whose merchandise was constantly being shoved in the faces of the WWE Universe by every child in the stadium. John Cena just sounds boring. So after seeing him as the head of the company for over 15 years, the people were understandably tired of seeing him. And this is something that was perfectly exploited by a man of lesser popularity, known as Bray Wyatt. Controversial opinion here, But Bray Wyatt, in my opinion, is quite possibly the greatest storytelling wrestler of the 21st century so far. Playing the role of a Charles Manson-esque backwoods cult leader from the swamps of Louisiana, his amazing promo skills allowed him to practically hypnotize the audience and hold them in the palm of his hand for as long as he was on screen. Every time this guy cut a promo, you felt like you had been transported to a cabin in the woods for a cult meeting with Bray and his family, Eric Rowan and Luke Harper. And as if his mic skills weren't impressive enough, his in-ring ability and the way he was able to incorporate his character into his moveset and matches was a skill that only very few wrestlers can claim to have. What made the audience become so captivated by him was the fact that he was neither a good guy or a bad guy. You see, when it comes to wrestling, you typically have two characters you can play. One of them being the good guy, or as it's known in wrestling terms, the babyface, or a bad guy, otherwise known as a heel. But Bray Wyatt walked a very thin line between either of these roles, appearing to be a bad guy when looked at on a surface level, but upon closer evaluation and when looking at the reasons for why he instigated most of his fights, he was usually only doing it to try to prove a point. You see, typically heels in wrestling act like classic Disney villains, meaning that they're evil just for the sake of being evil. And the enjoyment from watching them comes from the fact that we love seeing them be over-the-top assholes to the crowd and their opponents. But the Wyatt family always tried to have a motive for them causing chaos, choosing their targets specifically to fit their overall message and goal of exposing the lies and corruption of WWE. And Bray Wyatt's first real attempt at this came in the form of, you guessed it, John Cena. Typically when a heel starts a feud with a babyface, it's to either challenge them for a championship, or because they've had beef with them in the past and they want revenge. But with this storyline, neither were champions at the time, and neither of them had ever encountered each other before. So it genuinely caught the audience off guard when Bray Wyatt's family began to attack John Cena from seemingly out of nowhere, and begged the question, what was his motivation? Well, as Bray puts it, to expose John Cena as a fraud.
What would the world be without its hero? What would the world be without its knight in shining armor here to save the day? You tell them that everything will be all right just as long as you're around. You're a liar. You are a liar, John Cena.
Much like the Joker and Batman, Bray Wyatt claimed that John Cena was no different than him, masquerading as a respectful, honorable good guy for all the kids to look up to, but that he was just like everyone else, who, according to Bray Wyatt, is selfish and greedy. He compared John Cena to a thoroughbred horse, who WWE had rigged the race of professional wrestling with to win over and over again so that the kids would always have someone to cheer for. And so he set his sights on destroying the legacy of John Cena and exposing him for being no different than himself. What made this so exciting to watch was the fact that, despite being marketed as the bad guy, most of, if not everything Bray said about John Cena was true. John Cena was already actively labeled by the fan base as a child mascot. People are usually selfish and greedy by nature, and so much of John Cena's identity had been built up around the idea of being respectful and showing good sportsmanship, that this idea of him having a, quote, monster hidden inside of him that he wasn't showing and that Bray was going to force out, got the fans hooked.
I do not wish to slay this monster. Not yet. I just wanted to come out and play.
With the lights of thousands of spectators' phones illuminating the Superdome, the Wyatt family entered to thunderous applause, slowly and methodically taking their time, like a spider watching its prey caught in its web. And not too soon after, John Cena made his entrance to thunderous boos. Immediately upon the bell ringing, Bray drops to his knees, offering himself up to John Cena, offering him the win, and telling him to finish him. John Cena stands firm, however, denying the easy win, and insists over and over that Bray get up, before eventually Bray rushes him out of frustration, and the match truly begins. As they fight, Bray continues to taunt him over and over, making a mockery out of him, and repeatedly telling John that he has to let the monster inside of him out if he wants to win. As Bray continues to verbally and physically beat him up, John Cena finally snaps. The mental assault from the Wyatt family having finally taken their effect, and for the first time in 15 years, John Cena snaps, giving into his anger and beating Bray senseless to the point where even the referee has to stop him and ask him, "What are you doing?" All the while, Bray just laughs, having on some level proved his point. For the next 10 minutes, Bray and John go back and forth, with John Cena slowly removing the other members of the Wyatt family from ringside and getting increasingly more agitated, before Bray gives John a final ultimatum. Tossing him a steel chair and once again falling to his knees, Bray offers him not just the opportunity to win the match, but to be rid of Bray Wyatt forever. And with the crowd behind Bray mocking Cena alongside him, it honestly looks like he's going to go through with it, charging him with the steel chair before turning it against Eric Rowan at the last second, and finally pinning Bray Wyatt, overcoming the Wyatt family, and leaving the ring with his legacy intact. I hear a lot of people say that the Wyatt family should have won this match, and they claim that this loss ruined Bray Wyatt. But technically, he kinda did win. The thing that always set the Wyatt family apart from the other heel factions is that they never really cared about victories or title shots. They were always just trying to prove a point. Bray might have lost this match, but he had already won earlier by causing John Cena to go animalistic on him. And even though Bray and John's feud continued even after WrestleMania 30, this match for me will always be the definitive high point in their feud. One where two wrestlers challenged each other's ideologies and gave the audience one hell of an emotionally driven showdown. In the world of professional wrestling, there are many popular faces. Dozens of wrestlers with legendary reputations who have been cult icons in many people's lives since childhood. But for all the competitors WWE has churned out over the years, there is perhaps no wrestler whose name and reputation elicits a feeling of respect quite like Mark Calaway, aka The Undertaker. Hailing from a more experimental time in WWE's history, where wrestlers often relied on gimmicks to define their persona and were most of the time quickly forgotten, The Undertaker was different. This 300-pound, 6'4" man had this mysterious aura around him that genuinely made the audience unnerved every time he was on screen. And this is because Mark Calaway went to such great lengths to ensure that his character came off as genuine and believable to the public at all times. Slow-moving, slow-talking, unflinching whenever he took hits from his opponents, and showing little to no emotion at all times. Mark Calaway took great care in maintaining the authenticity of his character, and as a result, the people believed it, and they fell in love with him. The Undertaker's career is so expansive and legendary that I could honestly talk about it for half an hour if I wanted to. Unfortunately for me though, Super Eye Patch Wolf already did that way better than I ever could, so I recommend watching his video if you'd like a more in-depth look at The Undertaker's career. But I'll do my best to summarize it for you here. Mark Calaway's commitment to his persona as The Undertaker and his personality backstage as one of the most selfless and caring performers in the business led to him becoming one of, if not the, most loved wrestler in WWE. So much so that as WWE continued on into the 2000s, he continued to stick around and maintained his legendary status as the Dead Man, beating superstar after superstar and winning championship after championship. Until something became apparent. The realization that The Undertaker had never lost at WrestleMania. And just like that, the race was on. Year after year, challengers lined up, hoping to cement themselves in the history books as the one to overcome the most prestigious streak in all of professional wrestling, eventually culminating in what is considered one of the greatest matches in wrestling history, Triple H versus The Undertaker at WrestleMania 28, where for nearly an hour we watched these two competitors absolutely destroy one another. All while Shawn Michaels, Triple H's best friend and the wrestler whose career was ended 2 years prior by The Undertaker, played the role of the special guest referee. No matter what Triple H did, The Undertaker kicked out, just like he had always done at every other WrestleMania, concluding in one of the most beautiful moments in the history of professional wrestling, where after finally pinning Triple H, the three legendary wrestlers exit the ring together, looking back at the crowd one last time, knowing that they had just put on the performance of a lifetime. After this match, it seemed like The Undertaker's streak would never be broken. I mean, after all, if Triple H couldn't beat the streak, then no man could. But what about a beast? Brock Lesnar is one of the scariest wrestlers to watch perform in the WWE. And the reason for that is quite simple. Brock Lesnar is a legitimate fighter. You see, he might not possess The Undertaker's defeated streak, but he does possess one thing that no other wrestler in history can claim. And that's the fact that Brock Lesnar not only dominates matches within professional wrestling, but also in legitimate MMA matches. Joining UFC in October of 2007 and going on to become the undisputed UFC champion, he began to garner a reputation as one of the most violent fighters in the sport. With countless matches of his quickly becoming bloodbaths, he became regarded as one of the most dangerous fighters in MMA. This continued on until he finally returned to WWE in 2012, where he proceeded to beat up absolutely everyone, immediately attacking John Cena, going on to break Triple H's arm twice, and even F5ing the owner of the company, Vince McMahon. Literally nobody was off limits. Brock Lesnar adopted the nickname of the Beast Incarnate, and as a kid, the idea of watching my favorite wrestlers go up against him genuinely filled me with dread, because I knew that it meant I was about to watch them get completely destroyed. It's hard to tell how much of Brock Lesnar's matches are scripted, because it genuinely feels like he enjoys hurting people. In fact, he literally admits to this.
I was put on this earth to seek and destroy and to hurt people.
And hurt people he did, all the way up to WrestleMania 30, where he had his sights set on becoming the 1 in 21 to break The Undertaker's streak. This match is honestly hard for me to watch. The Undertaker's age at this point noticeably impairs his movement, and at times it makes the match feel slow and exhausting. Whereas most wrestlers would find themselves dominated by Brock Lesnar, The Undertaker actually does put up a decent fight, tanking multiple F5s and suplexes, all while Brock Lesnar's manager Paul Heyman hypes up Brock and stands in disbelief at the carnage he's witnessing. As the match slows down to a crawl, The Undertaker readies Brock Lesnar for a final tombstone piledriver. And as the audience anticipates the familiar side of The Undertaker pinning his next WrestleMania victim, this happens.
A third F5 to the Undertaker. To the cover, hooks the leg. Break is over.
I want you guys to rewatch this scene, but instead of watching the two competitors, I want you to watch the reaction of the crowd behind them.
Break is over.
Most of the people watching at the time stood there in stunned silence, waiting for an official to come out and reveal some hidden clip that showed Brock Lesnar cheated and the match really didn't count, waiting for something, anything to delegitimize what they had just seen happen in front of them. But the more they wait, the louder the silence becomes, and the more clear it becomes that The Undertaker's streak is truly over. The sound people behind WWE purposefully didn't play Brock Lesnar's music immediately upon his victory because they knew the reaction they were going to get. They wanted the reaction of the audience to be heard. They wanted the gravity of what had just happened to sink in with the crowd, and I think Paul Heyman's reaction here sums up what was going through everyone's mind at the time. After what felt like an eternity, Brock Lesnar's music queued up, and reality finally set in. Most people like to talk about this person's reaction when discussing this match, and while it is a very good one, my personal favorite has always been this one, because this pretty much sums up how I reacted upon watching this. I was in disbelief and shocked at first, but at the end of it all, once I had processed everything, I was amazed by the performance that was put on, and impressed with the fact that they actually decided to end the streak. And when all was said and done, I was just thankful to have gotten to watch Mark Calloway's story in the first place. And as The Undertaker slowly but surely got up and exited the ring, the audience cheered him on, not caring that he lost, and simply thanking him for all that he had done for the company for so many years. Many people still don't like the fact that The Undertaker's streak ended, but personally I'm glad that it did, for 3 reasons. 1, to chalk up The Undertaker as just this guy who nobody can beat at WrestleMania kinda diminishes everything else that he's done in his career. 2nd, The Undertaker was almost 50 at the time of this match, and it was clear that he wasn't going to be able to keep the streak up for much longer anyways. And 3rd, what better person to end the streak than Brock Lesnar? Brock Lesnar was already a wrestler who was universally hated by the fans, so who better to carry that burden of hatred from the audience the following night on Raw? And for as much hate as Brock Lesnar might get from the fans, you gotta give him props for even having the guts to go through with this match. I can only imagine the weight placed on his shoulders when he was told that he had to walk out in front of 70,000 people and end the most beloved wrestler of all time's most prestigious accomplishment. And to that same degree, one can only imagine the burden placed on Mark Calloway's shoulders when he was told that he had to break those same 70,000 fans' hearts by letting Brock Lesnar pin him. And even though this match broke the fans' hearts, they couldn't leave the stadium yet, because there was still one more match left. By beating Triple H at the beginning of the night, Daniel Bryan had earned a slot in the main event at WrestleMania. He had earned the opportunity to compete on the grandest stage of them all, for the most coveted title in all of professional wrestling. This was it. Nearly a year's worth of build-up had led Daniel Bryan in the WWE Universe to this moment. A year worth of fighting and being told that he was a joke. And with the audience already on the edge of their seats from the lineup of matches that they had just seen, the energy in the arena was absolutely electric. It was finally time to see if Daniel Bryan had what it took to be the face of the company. Despite having already wrestled earlier that night, and despite having an already injured shoulder, Daniel starts off the match swinging, immediately taking both of the other wrestlers head-on and defiantly standing his ground. The 3 wrestlers continue their brawl outside the ring for a solid 10 minutes, punishing each other with the steel steps, with no one wrestler being clearly in the lead, when suddenly out of nowhere, Daniel Bryan and the WWE Universe deliver their signature yes kicks to Randy and Batista. And this is the point in the match where I personally get exhausted just from watching, with Daniel Bryan struggling to catch his breath as he delivers dropkick after dropkick to each opponent. Realizing that he can't keep it up for much longer, Daniel decides to go for the win by putting Randy Orton into the yes lock, trying to make him tap out. And all at once, the crowd erupts into praise, eagerly waiting for Daniel Bryan to finally win the championship he's waited so long to get. But their cheers slowly die out as they see a familiar face entering the ring through the crowd.
Wait a minute, wait! That's Triple H and Stephanie's!
Triple H, in a last desperate attempt to keep the WWE Championship out of Daniel Bryan's hands, pulls the referee out of the ring and swaps him out for his own paid-off referee. Daniel Bryan, despite this, kicks out yet again. And when Triple H, in frustration, decides to handle things himself, Daniel dispatches of his boss once and for all and finally secures himself the victory. Or at least, so it would seem. Because just as soon as Daniel Bryan gains the upper hand and finally secures himself a fair fight, Randy Orton and Batista team up and deliver the finishing blow to Daniel Bryan. And that was it. This was too much. With the amount of abuse Daniel had sustained over the last 8 months, fighting Triple H earlier that night, and now this, the medics were called in, and Daniel Bryan was loaded onto a stretcher. Being deemed medically unfit to finish this match, he exited the ring. All the while, Randy Orton and Batista continued to fight one another, ensuring that regardless of who won this match, the Yes Movement would lose. Until... Daniel Bryan, fueled on nothing but adrenaline and the hopes of the WWE Universe, crawled out of the stretcher and continued to fight, struggling to get back to his feet before finally landing the same running knee that took out Triple H earlier that night, and putting Batista into the dreaded yes lock. All the while, the WWE Universe is in a frenzy, and commentator Michael Cole perfectly sums up the thoughts going through every audience member's mind.
Come on, Daniel! Come on, Daniel! They got it about Batista! Got it about Batista!
At this moment, all the pain Daniel has suffered comes rushing back to the audience's mind. All the times that he was told he was a joke, that he wasn't good enough. Every beating and humiliating action taken against him by the authority can be seen worn on his face. And in this moment, the WWE Universe reflects on just how long of a journey they've been on with Daniel Bryan. So naturally, the audience explodes when this happens. I've been struggling to write this portion of my script for a while now, and I think that's just because words do very little to convey the surge of emotions that this moment created. By having Daniel Bryan and the entire WWE Universe become so closely tied to one another for as long as they were, this victory really made it feel like every spectator was involved in the match that Daniel had just won. Every person at home who dreams of overcoming their boss and proving themselves was able to live out their dreams through the Yes Movement and Daniel Bryan's struggle. It was a long 8 months, but Daniel Bryan had finally overcome the odds and proven himself worthy as the title of face of the company, standing victorious in front of the same WWE Universe who had cheered him on for so long, and leading them in one last thunderous yes chant, closing out one of the most emotional and personal storylines in WWE history, and forever cementing WrestleMania 30 as one of, if not the best arc in WWE's long and ongoing history. Well, that would have been a good line to end this video on. So why am I still talking? Well, there's still one more match from WrestleMania 30 that I haven't talked about yet. And it doesn't seem like anything special at first glance, but I'd like to end off this video by talking about it, since I think it perfectly represents everything that I love about wrestling. And that match is the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royale. The premise for this match is quite simple. In memory of the legendary Andre the Giant, who you might remember from the beginning of this video, 40 wrestlers would compete all in the same ring with one simple goal: be the last one standing in the ring. And yes, this was just as entertaining to watch as it sounds. There's way too much to cover here, so I seriously encourage you to watch it after this video. It's all free on YouTube. In fact, most of these matches are. But for the purposes of this video, the only part of this match that I'm going to be focusing on is the ending. Namely, the encounter between the wrestlers of Cesaro and the Big Show. Now, unless you're blind, I think it's pretty clear to see that Andre the Giant and the Big Show are similar in, just a few ways. And given that this match was named in his memory, it seems very obvious that Big Show would win this match in Andre's name. But that's not what happened. The Big Show lost this match to Cesaro, and the question has to be asked, why? Wouldn't they want a wrestler who's the spitting image of Andre to be the winner of his trophy and carry on his legacy? Wouldn't they want him to win, just like Andre did? Well, maybe the answer will become clear if I play this clip side by side to this. And suddenly, a seemingly tragic loss is now a beautiful retelling of Andre's most famous moment. A moment that might not have been glorious for himself, but was glorious in its impact on the audience, its benefit for the company, and the story that it told. Because that, at the end of the day, is the job of a wrestler. Everyone that I've talked about here today, Triple H, Daniel Bryan, John Cena, Bray Wyatt, Brock Lesnar, The Undertaker, Randy Orton, Batista, Cesaro, and Big Show, all walked out at WrestleMania 30 with one goal in mind: to put their bodies on the line in the name of telling the best stories that they possibly could, and getting the audience emotionally invested in a way that only professional wrestling can do. WrestleMania 30 is, in my opinion, WWE's best arc. The match lineup was just so good for me, and the storylines were so well thought out that I personally haven't seen anything that WWE has done top it yet. But for some people, that might not be the case. One of the best things about professional wrestling is that it's always evolving. New storylines are being developed constantly, and amazing matches like the ones talked about in this video have and are bound to happen again. Whether you watch WWE, New Japan Pro Wrestling, or All Elite Wrestling, all wrestlers share the same passion for getting the audience as invested as possible and putting their bodies on the line for your entertainment. So I hope if you take anything away from this video, it's at minimum a newfound respect for the sport, and at most a new curiosity and desire to go out and watch professional wrestling. And if by some chance you ever hear about a little event called Wrestlemania coming to your town, you might want to look into it. Because one thing is for sure, it truly is the grandest stage of them all.
Did anyone expect this? Absolutely not. They hoped for it. Did everyone want this? Yes. Yes. Yes.
Daniel Bryan has overcome the authority.
There is your new face of WWE.